Hi, Strategy Simplified listeners. It's Naman here with a quick message before we dive into today's episode. Our next cohort of Black Belt is happening in December. If you are an MBA candidate or experienced hire planning to interview, either before the end of this year or early next year, December Black Belt is for you. With 8 one-hour one-on-one coaching sessions with an MBB coach, unlimited digital access to our drills and cases and courses, and a cohort that you go through group training with and are paired with for peer practice. To join the waitlist, click the link in the show notes. Now, let's get into today's episode.
In this episode, you're in for an absolute treat. We have Kristy Weinshel, the Executive Director of the Society for Healthcare Epidemiology of America, and Dr. Kavita Trivedi, who leads Trivedi Consults, a consulting organization that focuses on reducing disease and infection. These are both incredibly timely organizations that found themselves in a bit of a moment during COVID, where all of a sudden their member organizations and Dr. Trivedi's consulting organization were inundated with questions around how to prevent COVID in all kinds of different environments. It presented an opportunity to build consulting firms from scratch or to augment consulting firms and what they had currently been doing. And so today we talk about the principles of becoming your own independent consultant, some of the trials, the tribulations, and the massive opportunities that await. Hi, I'm Jenny Ray LaRue, and I'm excited to invite as guests today two amazing women that are going to share with us how they've built consulting lines of business and practice areas around specific expertise related to COVID and the pandemic. It's a really interesting conversation that I'm very much looking forward to. So I'll let each of you introduce yourselves as we're diving into the conversation today. And I think the best place to start would just be with a quick overview and a bio of who you are and where you've come from. And then I'm going to dive into fun questions, and then we'll end up with some of the more serious questions about how you've built your lines of business. So Dr. Trivedi, I'll let you go first. If you would just give us an introduction to where you are right now, but also how you got there, that would be super helpful.
Sure. Yeah, so I trained as a physician at Stanford University, and then did residency in internal medicine at UCSF here in San Francisco. And after decided I wanted to impact more people in global public health. And so I went to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention in Atlanta and did a fellowship in epidemics. In fact, I was in the Epidemic Intelligence Service. Then I came back to California, and I helped run the Healthcare Associated Infections program at the state health department. And after about 4 years there, decided I wanted to bring public health to the public, as opposed to waiting for public health to come, the public to come to us in public health. So I started my own consulting company almost 7 years ago, and have been able to work with all different types of companies, organizations, businesses in the last almost 7 years, focusing on infectious diseases epidemiology.
Amazing. Welcome. Kristy, we're looking forward to hearing from you. Give us a little bit about your background.
Yeah, so my name is Kristy Weinshel, and I'm the Executive Director for the Society for Healthcare Epidemiology of America, which is short for SHEA. And I have a Bachelor's of Business and an MBA from George Washington University, mainly because I stayed in the area. And I started out my career actually at a consulting and an accounting firm in their marketing group, but have slowly made my way over to working for associations. And now I am leading this association through a very interesting time, which is COVID, in a public health setting. So it's been a lot of fun. It's been a lot of very challenging. But I think having sort of a background in a variety of things has sort of helped lead that effort. So
Awesome. So since you got to introduce yourself second, Kristy, I'm going to have you go first with the fun questions.
Okay, great.
And so my first question is a career that you could have pursued but did not pursue.
Well, so I really wanted to be a lawyer, and I don't know why. I think it's really more because of the TV shows. They show being a lawyer very exciting, but then when it really gets down to it, it's not super exciting. It's like a lot of hours. So that was definitely something I had looked into, and I think I'm pretty glad I didn't do it, actually. So.
Love it. What was your favorite quarantine activity? Or I don't know if you're still quarantined currently, but your favorite activity during the quarantine period?
I mean, I shopped a lot online, so I'm pretty sure that was an activity that was my favorite, and my credit card would reflect that. So.
Amazing. They say that you put your money where your mouth is, right?
Yeah,
so you totally
definitely did that, yes.
Amazing. Good. Third question. What's the biggest risk that you've taken that's paid off?
You know, when I applied for this job to be the executive director, I was already working for Shea. And I think that it was a really big risk for me personally, because had I not gotten, every single person who I worked with knew that I applied, and every single volunteer knew that I applied. So had I not gotten it, I think it would have been really disappointing, but it would have been hard to kind of face all those people the next day. So I think that was kind of one of my bigger career risks.
Great. Okay, so next one. This is really important to me. East Coast or West Coast?
East Coast.
Tell me why. You got to back it up.
There is no other time zone besides East Coast time. I'll be honest with you. Every other time zone is confusing and just subpar. So I'm sorry for all of you.
It's so true. People will dial us in when we're on the West Coast, and they're like, "Why are you not on New York time?
Yeah,
this is just rude."
Yeah. It's really the only time zone that exists. So.
Okay, good. And then final question. First place you'll travel when we move past the COVID period. So borders are open, opportunities arise for you to do whatever you want. What does that look like?
Yeah, so I was supposed to go to a conference in Paris, and I would really like to go to Paris again. And it got closed down right as we were sort of getting ready to go, and it's been hugely disappointing, and it's like one of my number one disappointments from 2020. So that's where I first put on my list.
So Paris 2021 or 2022.
2022, I think is probably the safer bet, but yes.
Okay, awesome. All right, and so Dr. Trivedi, what about you? I'll ask you similar questions in a different order. So first question for you is East Coast versus West Coast. Tell me what you're thinking.
This is tough for me. So I'm from North Carolina originally, but I've been in California the other half of my life. So literally half and half on both coasts. But I think I would have to go West Coast.
West Coast.
I really love being outside, and I love the fact that we can be, other than when the wildfires affect us, I love being outside here, and that is all year round. So I would say that I'm West Coast now.
Amazing. Okay, love it. Great. And so for you, a career that you could have pursued but did not pursue.
Yeah, I was thinking about it after you asked Kristy. It's hard because I really love practicing medicine. I love being invited into people's kind of innermost thoughts and history in such an intimate way very quickly. So, I really love what I do, and I love public health. But if I had to put healthcare aside completely, maybe something like architecture. I like building things. I like to be innovative. So I think, I think architecture potentially.
I love that. Awesome. Okay, and what about you? First place that you'll travel when we move past COVID, the borders are flung wide, et cetera.
Yeah, I think right now it's any place that has done well with COVID. So New Zealand is looking very appealing. Southeast Asia, Thailand is looking really appealing. I think those kind of places are where I'm most interested to travel when we are able to travel.
Little personal professional mix there.
Yeah.
Can't get away from the studying of the culture at the same time. Yeah, absolutely. Great. What was your favorite quarantine activity, or is your favorite quarantine activity currently?
Yeah, we're still sheltering in place. So I think it's non-activity. We were I have young kids. We were kind of overscheduled before COVID, and it's been nice to kind of have just some time to just watch a movie and play a game. So I like having that time with my family that we didn't have so much before.
We'll be right back after this quick break. Have you ever heard a new digital trend and thought to yourself, okay, does this really matter? Asking the right questions helps you cut through the noise and get down to what matters most. I'm Jim Hertzfeld, host of the What If, So What podcast, where we discover what's possible with digital and figure out how to make it real by asking what if, so what, and most importantly, now what? Subscribe and listen, and together we can turn big ideas into tangible actions so you can get shit done.
I love that. Good. Okay. And then final question, biggest risk that you've taken that's paid off?
Yeah. So definitely going into consulting. I mean, I had a really nice state government job with a big platform. In California, we kind of oversaw infections in 1,200 nursing homes and 425 hospitals. So, I had all this work to do in public health, and a large number of facilities that I got to kind of access and help. And so leaving that to start something on my own was definitely a big risk, but it has paid off in so many different ways, which I'm excited to tell you about now.
So excited. Well, what I want to do now, thank you ladies for those introductions. We're really excited to have you here and excited to get to know you a little bit more. So that was good on a personal and professional level. And so now we'll move a little bit over into the personal realm. I'll ask you each a couple of questions at a time, and then we'll kind of bounce back and forth through the segue of the questions. And then I'll leave an open platform at the end if there's anything that we haven't covered that you'd like to share. So Kristy, I'll start with you. I'm interested in just learning a little bit more. And I know that other people may have never heard, as I did about the Society for Healthcare Epidemiology in America. I was interested in it because of some of the consulting work that you're doing, but I know that there's a broader purpose. So what does the society do? What are some of the purposes of the society? Just tell us a little bit about the data.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're a professional society that seeks to improve public health by establishing infection prevention and supporting antibiotic stewardship among healthcare providers. So our members are people who work in healthcare facilities across the healthcare continuum who are passionate about infection prevention and stewardship, which is really preserving antibiotics for their long-term use and making sure that they're not overused or misused in ways that makes them not a viable medicine alternative. They're still available for medicine going forward. We serve this purpose by really educating our members and developing clinical resources and guidelines and stuff. But really our goal and our main purpose is to provide safe healthcare across the globe to everybody and make sure that everybody has access to that. So it really has a very broad mission that encompasses a lot of different things. And it's something that I think everybody who's ever had any healthcare touch them in any way really understands the value and need for. So it's really exciting.
And what are some of the stats of the org? I mean, I could imagine that there would be a lot of people that would raise their hand and say, I'm interested in that mission. But I don't know what the membership looks like or how people are specifically involved. How would somebody get involved, and how many members do you have?
Yeah, so we have almost 3,000 members, mostly at academic institutions who really can devote the time and energy to having positions that really focus on this. But when we talk about like our educational content, it touches a lot more because there are people that are, tangentially involved, or this is a piece of their job. And so we do grab a larger segment when we talk about education and sort of some of the other pieces. We have mostly members who are physicians, but some infection preventionists, which are nurses that sort of specialize in the infection prevention area. And then we have researchers, microbiologists, pharmacists. So it really does span a lot of medicine in terms of different backgrounds.
Love it. And you said mostly you are the epidemiology. Your focus is on epidemiology in America. Is that right? You said something about international. I'm curious to know how that blends over.
We have international members, and we have a lot of members in in Asia, where this is sort of becoming a bigger piece of things. They don't necessarily train in infectious disease, but they have a lot of microbiology that kind of overlaps this. And then it's also really taking off in Latin America, South America. There's a bigger need for it, as well as Africa. But again, in some resource limited settings, it's a little bit more challenging because this is sort of kind of the next level. And if you're worried about clean water supply for your medical, you're not as focused on infection prevention. But we are working to make sure that what we do can be leveraged for those situations as well, because it's just as important to have infection prevention in those areas.
Awesome. And so you've mentioned now a little bit about SHEA. Tell me about how you got to your current role. You did, I know, marketing at Grant Thornton. You were at the Utilities Telecom Council, but just give us a little color behind the background of how you got to where you are today and why you're interested in leading the work.
Yeah, so I started out in marketing. My undergrad degree is actually in marketing. So I was already working with a consulting group while I was in college. And I was working with their financial services practices and their nonprofit practice. And I don't know anybody knows anything about DC. There's an association for everything, representing every single niche of any aspect of any job or career path you could possibly think about. And so when we were kind of doing a lot of not-for-profit outreach, I sort of got interested in that. And I wanted to go back to school to get my MBA, and really working for Grant Thornton, it was really hard to kind of juggle those hours and get my MBA. So I went, I looked for a job in a association, and then really was working for Utilities Telecom Council, but utilities are not really they're very interesting, but it's not necessarily a passion. Whereas when I started looking for my next job, I looked for something that really gave me some more meaning. And I think, SHEA was really definitely it. It's something that, again, I think I said this, but if you're a patient or you interacted with somebody who's a patient, you instantly understand what our mission is and how it impacts you every time you walk through a healthcare facility.
I love that. So the mission-driven portion of the organization was a big part of it.
Yes, definitely.
Love that. Okay, well, Dr. Trivedi, I'll move over to you now. I'm interested in starting your story, which will probably involve some pretext as well, but starting your story with, okay, you wake up, it's 2014 as I understand it, you launch a consulting firm. So what had led you up to that point to do such a wild and crazy thing?
Yeah. So, at the state health department, I had a vantage point that many others don't. Because as Kristy is saying, I have been a member of SHEA since I started in this area. And all of the professionals that I interacted with were experts in one hospital, in one nursing home, or working in one setting. And so their vantage point is obviously the setting that they work in. But at the public health department, we had this really broad view of what was happening. We saw what was happening in small and critical access hospitals, hospitals that had 25 beds that were in a rural part of California versus the larger academic centers with fellows and residents and students and, just tons of resources that were, had just had a lot of plentiful resources, both in financial resources as well as people resources, right? So we were able to see what was happening kind of across the healthcare continuum. And so I really enjoyed that vantage point. So when I spoke about infection prevention, about antibiotic stewardship, I had this really broad, unique view. And then as I continued with the health department, I tried to get some innovative research off the ground, where I was trying to learn from the hospitals and the healthcare facilities that were doing really well. And we were trying to bring that information to the hospitals that weren't doing as well. And there was some resistance because I think in some aspects, some places in public health, there is this feeling that everyone should be at a baseline and we should bring everybody up to that baseline level of kind of public health. But I wanted to kind of drive organizations past that baseline. I wanted them to strive for something even greater than that kind of baseline level of infection prevention. And I felt that as a independent consultant, I could do that in a much more targeted way. And so, yeah, I went out on my own and everybody said to me, "What are you doing? This is very strange. Like, are you, what are you doing?" Like, really, having a physician as an independent consultant, that in and of itself is a little bit strange. And then being in public health, how are you going to be in public health when you're not at a state, local organization? You know, how are you going to leverage that? So yes, it was really risky in some ways. But I'm very creative and innovative, and I wanted to see if I could partner with organizations that were like-minded like me and push them past that baseline, and see what else we could accomplish. So that's kind of where I came from and why I did what I did.
So I want to start at the beginning, because this is the big question that a lot of people have. How do you get your first few contracts? How do you price them? What do you have this expertise maybe, but you have to repackage it essentially into something that's a consulting engagement. What does that look like? And what did that look like for you back when you first started?
Yeah, well, I will say that SHEA, the society that Kristy now is the executive director of, has been so instrumental in kind of both helping me and propelling me both from a kind of a confidence standpoint as well as from a business standpoint. So, everyone says this, and I don't mean to be trite, but it's all about relationships, right? It really is all about relationships. The people that I have spend time talking with and building relationships with at all the SHEA meetings, at conferences, those relationships end up being invaluable when you are launching your own consulting practice. And people will say to their friends and colleagues, I'll give you like really good example of what happened, just a few months ago. One of my SHEA colleagues told her husband's law firm that, you need an epidemiologist consultant on COVID? I know somebody. So, that's how I got this client, which was this law firm who has now become a really large client for me and my firm. So, a lot of it has been these relationships that I have developed over the years. A lot of my colleagues in public health as well at CDC, if there are presentations, engagements where the public health department doesn't feel that they can interact with this private organization in a really robust way, they will say, "Oh, I have this consulting firm that you can work with." So I feel like a lot of it has been because of these relationships that I have developed over the years and word of mouth. And then so that's one thing. Definitely, relationships are important. I think the second thing is having a website that's really active, that displays kind of currently what your consulting firm is doing. And I will say for me, I focused on infection prevention and antibiotic stewardship since 7 years ago. And of course, in the last 8 months, the infection prevention part has become quite popular. So, we've had to pivot a little bit to increase our information on our website around COVID-19 and around now COVID-19 and flu. And so, you have to stay with the times. You have to be able to know what's going on and then make sure that your consulting firm is current, I would say, current. So website, I think the last thing I would say is social media. I think, and I would have never said this 7 years ago when I started, but I do think places like Twitter, LinkedIn, these are also places where you can get business and is a nice place to both interact with colleagues to hear about what people are doing. Because the other thing about consulting, it can be very isolating, right? Because you are not associated with an institution, with an organization. So you want to make sure that you're reading what's going on in the literature, you're reading what the luminaries in our field are talking about. So staying up to date on SHEA podcasts and making sure that you are hearing on social media from people that you want to hear from. So I think all those things are things that are really important for any management consult or any consultant to continue doing. And you must continue doing it. You can't just do it for a month and then drop off, because business development, you must always continue trying to get new clients and figuring out where your niche is.
So I'm going to ask Kristy a question in just a second, but I just want to go back to one specific thing. Can you tell me about your first client? Because I think you're right about the relationship side, but I think some people even have trouble with the nuts and bolts of like, what are you selling and what do you offer and how do you price it? When you tell somebody like, I'm now a consultant and I can do this for you, can you just tell us about what happened in terms of your first project? Did you throw a number out there? Did you kind of know how to price it? What was the real behind the scenes of that?
Yeah,
first
sure. Good question.
Situation?
So the first thing I would say is that because I was at the state health department, I was involved with a lot of projects when I left. And all of those groups that I was involved with said to me, okay, great, now we can pay you to be involved with our project. As opposed to before, when I was part of the state, they couldn't pay me. So that was a little surprising to me. So they said, okay, great, we'll pay you now. And so a lot of my early projects were rollovers from my state job. So that was easy. But the second thing is when I started pricing myself, so my husband's a lawyer, which is really helpful in all of this. But I remember him saying to me, if they say yes too quickly, you've gone too low, right? So a couple of my first projects, when I threw a number out, they jumped on it and said, oh, that sounds great. And I was like, oh, shoot, I was too low. I'll also say that in healthcare, we don't often get paid probably what we're worth. And as a consultant, I can throw out a number that I feel really good about because I know that my product is worth that amount of money. And if they don't agree, they can walk away, and I feel good about it because I gave them a number that I felt was, consistent with my work product. So I would say people should throw out the number that makes them feel good about, finishing the product and finishing the project and putting their all into it. Because all we have is our work product, and I'm very confident with my work product, and I think that is reflected in why I charge what I charge.
Love it. I have this vivid memory of sitting at a steakhouse in the South with a client, and the CEO of the client asked the partner that was on our team, who was also at the table, if he could explain how they developed such amazing talent in consulting firms. One of the greatest insights for me of that conversation was that the partner responded, well, we test them to bring them on to make sure that they have the right foundational material, but ultimately we create great consultants. And I believed from that moment on that the training that I received was more important than the foundational intelligence or capabilities that I started with, which was a really healthy and appropriate way to think about talent. I've also built that into our same organization at Management Consulted. We take smart, great, thoughtful people who are awesome writers, but we work on training them into the kinds of people that really make big differences in our organizations and organizations around the world. In addition, we offer this in the form of corporate training to outside institutions who battle with things like corporate communications, clarity of thought, and basic analytics. We have really exciting programs that we deliver remotely and, when the time is right, in person, and we would love to help you. Please reach out at managementconsulted.com. Awesome. Okay, that's helpful and such good color. So do you think that a lot of people are like, I don't know where that first contract is supposed to land and how it's going to go? So that's awesome. Okay, so Kristy, back to you. So I want to know a little bit about how SHE supports the community that are interested in being consultants. And I understand that maybe differentially to other associations, this is something that you guys actually take very seriously. So can you tell me just a little bit about the education and resources that y'all have prepared for your consultants? What are some of the common questions that you're getting? What are you trying to address in that education? I'd love to know just a little bit more about what SHE as an organization is doing.
Yeah, so when COVID hit, we started getting a lot of calls from companies about, how do we do this? What do we do? How do we handle this? How do we respond? How do we make COVID compliant? How do we bring people back? And so we also started getting calls from our members. And there's only so many of them we can say, you should call Kavita, before she was like, okay, you guys need to come up with another plan. So we created a podcast. We created a list of things. We had heard tangentially that some of our members were calling calling us sort of midstream with consulting, and they were already like doing work for people, or they weren't charging them, or they had no agreement with them to do any consulting, or they didn't have like separate insurance. It was all very fuzzy. They were just sort of, people were calling them, they were responding and just trying to meet the need. And we were like, whoa there, you need to slow down. Like, have you thought about, getting insurance or having a lawyer review your contracts or like all these things? And they were like, no, wait, I just returned the phone call. And we were like, probably not the best advice. So Kavita had already done for us, Dr. Trivedi had already done for us a really nice webinar that we were able to kind of repackage a little bit, and then also worked with us on a podcast. And then we put out like a list of things people should follow, and we created sort of like an email database where people were emailing us and we were trying to match people up. So it really became all in response to COVID. I mean, before then we had some one-off consulting requests that were like very specific for different projects, or about really about expert witness testimony, I think was one of our biggest things. And so it really, when COVID hit, infection prevention, I think people were just Googling, right? And they came across us and they were just started reaching out. So it became something that we needed to respond to for our membership.
So one of the specific questions that I know we asked you to prepare, and I hope that you have your top 3 because they're probably 50, but what are 3 of the best pieces of advice that you have if somebody is beginning the consulting journey, one of your members?
Yeah, so I think just like Dr. Trivedi said, we told them they needed to have legal review of all their contracts. I mean, I think they're physicians for the most part, and legal review is not necessarily their strong suit, right? I mean, a lot of them work for academic institutions, and their contracts are being reviewed by a large conglomerate of legal team that sit in an academic office. And this, they're doing one-off, and they need to make sure that it fits their needs and that it doesn't interfere with their day job that a lot of them either hope to go back to or hope to spin off from. Like, they have different career needs, so they need to understand that. The second was that if you're going to do this more as a one-off project, then you need to have a website, because people aren't necessarily just going to figure it out who you are and what you do, because this field is super niche, and unless you're really Googling down in the weeds, you're not going to find a specific person. And then our third piece of advice for them was to really consider, like, what is the purpose of this? Is the purpose of this to do these one-off projects, or is the purpose of this so that you can eventually sort of either retire from your job or change focus of your job or take 50% of your job? Think about what you're actually aiming for. Or if you're doing this as a one-off, there's a lot more risk involved. Whereas if you're doing this as a pathway to something different, you're going to treat it a little bit differently. So that was sort of how we were sort of responding to members who were calling us with questions about it.
Love it. Okay, so Dr. Trivedi, I'll go back to you. I have a question for you related to just what you do when you get the influx of business. So I'm guessing that there, like you mentioned, was not only a change in the topic, but also the quantity of business interest that you've had over the last 8 months related to COVID. And I'm particularly interested in understanding how you've chosen your clients, how you've chosen who you would say yes to, if the duration of your projects have changed. Just share a little bit about some of the metrics around your business and how you've decided to serve it over the last 8 months have gone specifically in this space.
Yeah, thanks. Great question also. So before COVID hit, I would say I had more traditional clients that were in the healthcare space or working within the healthcare space. So a lot of nursing homes, a lot of quality improvement organizations that were trying to improve care within the healthcare space. And then since COVID hit, the need is now across the board, right? It's schools, it's community centers, it's law firms, it's technology companies. So yeah, I like to choose a client where I feel like they will actually take my advice and suggestions for recommendations. And that's not always the case. And I fully understand that they have a focus of wanting to continue their business, right? And my focus is to prevent infections within their employees and with their staff and with their clients. So, I usually take an introductory call where I will talk with the the potential client and make sure that our kind of vision for what they want me to do and their goal for our interaction are the same, or at least we're on the same page. And I can kind of gauge in that first conversation whether or not it's an organization that I really want to be involved with, because at the end of the day, it's my name, my reputation that's associated with what they're doing in infection prevention. So I have to make sure that, I feel good about working with them. So that's super important. That's what I've been doing. But it's been really interesting to work so far out of the healthcare space, with an organization that came to me through SHE, a youth community center that was scheduled to open in October for a disadvantaged, low-income community where they are doing performing arts and visual arts and dance. So they're like playing the trombone and they're acting. And these are things now that we know have increased risk of aerosol generation. So we really have to think through some of these issues. And we're also talking about, some kids, some 25-year-olds. So it's just been really interesting from an intellectual standpoint to try to apply our infection prevention principles to all these other settings that I hadn't really thought about doing before.
I love that. Okay, great. Well, I have one final question, even though I could probably go on for ages, just to, in light of the fact that our listeners may have different needs in terms of the duration of our conversation. I have one final question for each of you, and then I'll leave the platform open in case you do want to mention anything else that I haven't asked about. So, Kristy, I'll ask you first. You've been advising people as they've been thinking about setting up these firms, and one of the biggest challenges that we see is the gap between where you stop giving free information and you start charging. How do you help your consultants, your members navigate between the initial consultation and the consultation?
So I think that because our members, a lot of them are not like Dr. Trivedi, they don't have their own consulting practice. They were just talking to anybody who called them, and they were giving them so much information, and they were so thrilled to be helpful because that's who they are. I mean, they really do have a passion for infection prevention. And when you give them this really neat conundrum of some like novel place, they're going to like brainstorm how that's going to work. Like, what does that mean? Like opening Broadway, I can spend hours thinking about this. It's so interesting to me. Right. Yeah. And, they would call us and they'd say, I just, spent 14 hours with, and we're like, what did you do? And so it was more just kind of making them understand that what they were doing was a value add and that people wouldn't mind paying for it. I know that for some people that was a real light bulb moment. It sounds really simplistic, but I think they didn't even realize that they could be charging, that it could be a consulting idea, that they could sort of separate themselves from what they do every day and do this and really help do this and get paid for it. I mean, just because you have a passion for it and you have some ideas doesn't necessarily mean you can just spend all your extra time doing this. So it was for some, it was very exciting. They were very excited to hear that this is like viable for them.
I love that. Well, and Dr. Trivedi, so I have a two-parter for you. It's kind of cheating in the last question, but the first part, you've mentioned a couple of things that you would suggest from a business development standpoint and starting out some of the contracts, but just in general, if there's one other piece of advice that you would give to people that are thinking about setting up their own independent consulting firms. And then my second part of the question is, what's one piece of advice that you have for yourself, something that you're trying to keep in mind as you're building your business and your practice over the next couple of years? So do those in either order.
Yeah. Well, I let me just first reflect on what Kristy said. Actually, I think it's so important for us to charge for our advice because people take the advice differently when you charge for it. If you're giving advice free, people you digest it in a different way than you do if you've paid for it. So I think that is just one thing I wanted to reflect on what Kristy said. So I encourage my colleagues who call me please charge for your time. It doesn't have to be a lot of money, but it should be something, because we should be offered some compensation for our expertise. We've spent too many years training for this. We need to get compensated for it in some way, shape, or form. So that's just one thing. I think the other thing in terms of advice is, I like to tell people that are thinking about consulting is know your superpower, know what you offer, and believe in it. So, my superpower is I can digest really technical scientific information and spit it out in a very easily understandable manner. And I think that is my superpower. And during this pandemic has been extremely valuable for my clients to, because we're getting barraged with information on the pandemic. I mean, there are 4,000 papers published on COVID-19 every week. And how do you take all that information and make it something digestible? I think that's, so know your superpower, believe in yourself, believe in your product. I can't stress that enough. And lastly, like I said, it's all about relationships. So nurture those relationships, send those gifts at the end of the year to your clients or to people that have given you clients, such as Shay, or, make sure you nurture those relationships, especially in a time like this where we're all disconnected. We're not meeting at conferences. We're not meeting at, face to face. You really need to try to find a way to nurture relationships, because that's how business continues to come to you. And then for me, what am I working on? I am working on more balance in my life, because independent consulting, although it is allows you to have some balance, you can still get imbalanced with how much time you spend working at the computer or taking on new clients. It's hard to kind of figure out how much time a client will take when you're accepting them. So, try to figure out how to take time out to go for a walk, do some meditation, or just have some balance in your life as you're trying to do consulting, because that is ultimately the way you continue doing this work for a longer period of time and not get burnt out at some point.
Kristy and Dr. Trivedi, I'm really grateful that you joined us today. I want to leave the floor open if you have one final thing that you would like to say as an exhortation or an encouragement to folks that are thinking about either stepping out of their traditional scientific role, maybe into a consulting role, or that are thinking about building a more formal arm of a consulting practice. We'd love to know what your suggestions would be.
Go ahead, Kristy. You want to go first?
I mean, I think what this pandemic has sort of shown from our membership is that everybody can do it. And, if it's something that you're interested in, even during a pandemic, there's no bad time to give it a whirl and figure out, like Dr. Trivedi said, what is your superpower? Because there's definitely always a niche there for something.
Yeah, I would just agree with that and say, make sure you dot your I's and cross your T's. Make sure you have the right professional liability insurance. Make sure you have the right contracts in place. Make sure you have an LLC or whatever form. You want to make sure all those things are kind of in place to protect yourself. But then I would just say, you can end consulting whenever you want and go back to a more traditional job. It's a way, I think, to explore other opportunities that you might not otherwise explore. And so I think that if you have confidence and you are interested in being creative and innovative, I think it's a really wonderful way to explore your own qualities and see where it can take you.
Fantastic. Thank you both for your expertise, for all that you're doing for all of us at the moment to keep us safe and healthy. And thank you so much for sharing your experience today. It was really tremendous.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us. It's great.
Becoming an independent consultant is not for the weak of heart, but it's a bigger opportunity than most people realize. At Management Consulted, we can help you if you want to set up your own independent consulting firm. And we'd love for you to reach out to us, team@managementconsulted.com, or you can find the link to the specific information in the show notes. If you liked this episode, please like, share it, and leave us a great review. And in addition, if you have ideas for future guests on future episodes, for example, maybe you yourself are an independent consultant that wants to share your story, or maybe you're interested in building out how to become an independent consultant, we would love to hear from you. Finally, if you're interested in anything related to getting jobs as consultants in consulting firms, we have lots of information on that at our great website, managementconsulted.com. Thanks for joining.